Thank you for staying with us on the AM show and welcome back. Now, we talk vaccines now, the rollout and the current situation with so many issues across the world when it comes to getting access to the jab. Joining us for this all-important conversation where we hope to bust any myths as well tied to receiving these vaccine shots, Dr. Chris O. He's a member of the Covid-19 team at the University of Ghana Hospital. We're also joined by Dr. Michael Owusu, a virologist with the KCCR. Doctor and Doctor, a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Great. So let me start with you, Dr. Owusu. Right. As a virologist, you've been there, you've done that, you know exactly what is going on. What can you tell us about the current state of Ghana when it comes to our fight against COVID-19? Where would you say we are?
Yes, so if you look at the epidemic curve of this virus so far, it looks as if we are in the decline phase. Currently, we are doing a positivity rate of something between 5 to 10%. In our center, for instance, for the past close to 3 to 4 weeks, we are recording between 5 to 10 cases for every 100 runs that we do. This is much lower compared to what we did somewhere in January, February, and towards the latter part of March. We were recording between 40 to 60 cases out of every 100 cases that came to our facility. So clearly, you will see that we are really in the decline phase, and the virus prevalence is down. And this is the natural behavior of the virus. What it happens is that we went through the first wave where we hit a peak of close to about 700 somewhere in the month of June, July, and August. That was in 2020. This particular year, once again, we also went up something between 800, 700, 800, somewhere in the month of February. And then it went down to where we are now. So it's not too clear, but it's likely that if we don't manage this well and don't still stick to our protocols, we may likely enter into a third wave because we still have a lot of susceptible populations around. Many people either still have not been infected, or even for those that have been infected, in a couple of 3 months to maybe 4 months, it's likely that immunity will wane and they will become susceptible once again to infection. So far as you have susceptible populations there, you will still continue to have the rise and then the downfall of this virus. It will just go up and down until if you succeed in getting the vaccine, then you can really get it out of your system. But if you don't have a vaccine, then you are only waiting for the next epidemic to also happen, which will also go through its own cycle, hit another peak, and then go down. So for now, things looks better, things looks well, but it depends on how we respond. If we respond well, we can keep it at this level whilst we manage other things like vaccines. But if we just lose our guts, we may enter into a third wave that may be more severe than what we experienced in January, February.
So Dr. Owusu, just to get it clear, looking at the numbers, how they've taken a tumble when it comes to COVID-19, it's a bit surprising to hear you talk about the fact that we could have a third wave if certain measures are not put in place. In other words, we're still not out of the woods. We have to, continue clamping down on the virus till we bring it to its barest minimum.
Exactly. You know that if you have, you follow through what you understand by the force of epidemics and what drives an epidemic of a virus like SARS-CoV-2, it is susceptible population that drive the virus. So if you don't have people that have adequate immunity against a particular virus, you cannot say that you have defeated the virus that is not in the system anymore. So far as you have susceptible populations, you will still have scenarios where the virus can go through its cycle, hit a peak, infect, cause disease, cause deaths. And the SARS-CoV-2 is one of, that is its behavior, like other things like influenza and other viruses, where you never finish dealing with them. You still have large number of people out there that the virus can still ride on. And if it gets access to this fuel, It's like having a fuel, a petrol and fire. If the fuel is available, then of course you still have a fire go through your system. So far, for several places there, you cannot say you are done. We still will have to deal with it and manage it well. If we don't, then we are only waiting a couple of 1 or 2 or 3 months. We are likely to have another wave that may be more severe because, I mean, as the virus also goes through this cycle, it is also learning. That is what it does. It is learning to understand the system, it's learning to adapt, it's learning to mutate, it's learning to change its form and its nature. So as we wait for other interventions like vaccines and we don't manage things well, then of course a stronger form of these viruses may come up. And when they come up, they may contribute to more damage like we used to know. So it is more of we have to be careful and then manage this in a situation in a way that we don't allow it to cause damage and destroy us.
Okay, right before I move on to Dr. O, a quick point came to mind because you spoke about the ravages of the virus, what could happen in the next 3 months. Have we discovered any newer variants of the COVID-19 virus? I hear there are developments practically every day with regard to new strains and all of that. Just very briefly, is there any that you can speak on?
Well, as for the new strains and new variants, they are always coming up. I think to date we have close to over 700 different variants in the world, which are always coming up in different lineages. We have the A lineage, the B lineage, which are almost different forms coming up every single day that samples are sequenced. But what is most important is whether they are variants of concern. And there's a definition for what we mean by a variant of concern. The ability of the virus to have an important public health role, a public health impact, whether one is able to cause, whether it is able to cause severe disease is one of the things you look out for. Whether it's able to cause high level of mortality is one of the things you also look out for. Whether the virus is able to affect diagnostic capacity and detection by the PCR assays we are using is another indicator. And whether the antiviral drugs available are able to target and treat this particular emerging strain is another target. For now, we have about 5 of them that are variants of concern that we know. In Ghana, we have the B117 in about close to about 60% of those who have disease and signs and symptoms. About 20% of them is from the South African strain, the B351 strain that we know. And then there are other few ones that may not cause much harm. We are lucky that we don't seem to have more of the strains that we call them the vaccine escape mutant strains, like the ones we have in Brazil and the South Africa. They are not so predominant, so we are not much worried. It looks like what we have are things that we can deal with. But what it means is that as we manage this, if you don't handle them well, and you allow them to gain grounds, then of course they may contribute to become more of dominant ones. You know, the viruses compete among themselves. So the weaker ones and the stronger ones, and the weaker ones will always give way for the stronger ones to predominate.
Right.
So if you are able to manage things well, then you can keep the stronger ones at low level. Like the case of Brazil, the P1 strain is causing a lot of deaths, and even the AstraZeneca vaccines and the Pfizer vaccines will not be able to contain this strain with this vaccine. So it tells you how the viruses can move and then adapt. But talking about this, also we have to understand that as a country, we are limited in a way. In the genome bank for now, the number of sequences deposited from Ghana is not more than 200. It's just few numbers because we don't have large sequencing capacity. So we can only talk about what we know within our limited capacity. But I believe that if we were to sequence thousands of strains every week, I'm sure we will see things that may be of concern. But with our just limited logistics, this is what we can see. And we hope that behavior should be one of the tools that we can use to manage this rather than looking more at the science, because we don't have that luxury of logistics to delve into the science and to make predictions and to be able to tell how the future will look like.
Right. Let me cross over now to Dr. O, and thank you for being patient with us. Now, Dr. O, in recent days, we've heard from the Director General of the Ghana Health Service, who has said that part of why we're enjoying the sort of low figures we're seeing on the back of COVID-19 has to do with the vaccination drive. As of 5 days ago, the 15th of April, at about 5 p.m., we had vaccinated some 755,000 Ghanaians. Do you feel that is enough to affect the COVID-19 numbers as we see it?
Okay, thank you very much. Just a couple of things before that, and I actually want to re-emphasize the natural history of viral pandemic, as Dr. Wusu have mentioned. Even without vaccine, we know that whenever we have a wave, there will be a peak and there will be a trough of the wave. It will come down at some point in time. But the question is, as he said, do we still have susceptible population? And how big is that susceptible population with regard to transmissibility? Now, let me just draw your attention to what happened with the first wave, at which point in time we had no vaccine. Between effectively April and the end of August, we had the worst part of our first wave epidemic, where basically in around June, July, we had the worst part of that. Now, by September getting to October, naturally the numbers started coming down, and that's the natural history of any pandemic. But we knew at that point in time that unless we had vaccine and significantly completed vaccination of a critical part of our population, that if this continued worldwide, and the waves are not at the same time worldwide, you would realize that the Europeans almost always lead us, or we lag behind them roughly about 6 to 12 weeks with respect to a wave. Now, so when that went down, a lot of the protocols basically went down. People stopped wearing their masks. People started gathering. And then the activities right about November, December, basically was the fuel that Dr. Wusu was describing. Now, because of that, and because we still had significantly huge population that was susceptible to the virus, we had a much bigger wave with respect to its peak in January, February, March. And that had a lot more mortality compared to the first wave, which probably was a longer stretch. And that is the natural history why it happens. People have their third wave at the moment. There are actually countries that have a fourth wave, including developed countries. And that is part of the reason why people are aggressively sourcing vaccines and trying to reduce their susceptible population. Our second wave, actually in its decline, is just about a month. Now, during that period of time, we know that a significant population of those who were infected were mild or with mild symptoms or with no symptom. Most of those people may have natural immunity that was developed, not necessarily by vaccination during that period of time, but give them 3 months, that immunity is going to wane. And we know that already of this virus. We know categorically that the natural immunity hardly ever lasts more than 3 months. We've not done 3 months from the peak of our second wave. The peak of our second wave was at the end of February and up to the end of middle of March. We are basically roughly a month from the peak of our February. Majority of those who got infected and thankfully did not die may still have natural immunity at the moment, even if they were not vaccinated.
Right.
And that coupled with the population that have been vaccinated. But let's be clear, 750,000 of our population is actually not up to 10% of our population. It's roughly about 5% of our population. So we still have significantly more than 90% of our population that is at risk of basically getting a third wave. if they are not vaccinated. And that's why, yes, we are doing much better than most other African countries.
Right.
We need to do a lot better with vaccination.
Okay.
But
Dr. Wu, if I may
really
just
know whether this wave, we do not have a third wave. We are not where we should actually be expecting to see that we are not going to have an infection again. And that means we have that period of the next 1 to 2 months to have a significant critical population like the UK had, like Israel had, that is differentiating them from what is happening in Europe at the moment.
Okay, so we are not where we ought to be, but would you have expected by this point in time that we would have vaccinated more people, in terms of this vaccination drive? Barring what has happened in different parts of the world and access to vaccines, would you have expected that would have vaccinated many more Ghanaians as of this point in time?
Actually, with respect to the vaccines that we have been able to procure, I think we've done quite well with administering vaccine to arms. But we need to be aware that basically everybody is getting vaccine from almost the same sources now. This is not like an African epidemic like the other epidemics we've had, where the rest of the world can be producing and then we can go procure or beg for them. This actually, most of the places that we can procure, even if we were buying the vaccines, are actually in trouble at the moment. Significant one being India. We can see what is happening in India now. India is actually the worst hit in the world at the moment, with over 200,000 cases a day. So the dynamics are changing day by day. A month ago, when we were basically starting off the first dose of our vaccine, India was not in the trouble it is at the moment. So we could make projections as to how much vaccines we could get, how much vaccines we could get from Europe, from Russia and the other places. But during that period of time, things have evolved. So things may change. And that is the reality of any viral epidemic, that the source from which you get in may actually become compromised. So I believe, I'm not an expert in vaccine procurement, and I must say that I am not fully aware for where all our vaccines are going to come from.
Right.
But I would believe that those who are responsible for this are looking at different sources for vaccine with respect to targeting what we have already projected with our vaccination. We are doing well with what we have. We will need to get a lot more vaccine. We need to get vaccines to arm much more rapidly. And as I said, within the next 2-3 months, if we don't significantly have more than 50 to 70% of our population getting vaccine to arm, we are at risk.
Okay.
We pray we don't get to that situation.
Okay, let me come to Dr. Uzu now. And getting access to the vaccines is one thing. Being able to administer the vaccines is another thing altogether. Recently, we heard from Dr. Patrick Kumar-Waji, who was saying that some 500 vaccines had expired across different regions because of low patronage. How much do you feel all these conspiracy theories and the myths? I've spoken to a lot of people who have concerns about taking the jab, as well as stigmatization. People are being stigmatized, and so now they don't even want to own up when it comes to getting COVID-19. How much of a role do you feel these two things are playing, and how seriously should we take them?
Conspiracy theories are massive. They are, vaccine hesitancy is one of the biggest negative tools against vaccination and against the containment of this virus. And we've said that many times. A lot of efforts has gone in just before the administration of the vaccines by most of the health-related institutions, the media, and those of us in case management and public health, in basically saying that, yes, we need to reduce this conspiracy theory. The science is there, it's clear for most people, but you know what, emotive issues are quite difficult to get off people's mind. And it's unfortunate when we have vaccines expiring, when we're actually talking about difficulty in accessing these vaccines. And I think that vaccine management may need to be a bit more. I mean, there are places, there are people who are still looking for vaccines to receive and may not be able to get them because it's run out in their centers. So for me, it is difficult to have vaccines expiring in places, but they will expire because their half-life are quite short. Majority of them have to be in cold chain, and if you don't administer them, they're going to go bad. But we have to continue, and that is where the media has a very strong role. And I think that there needs to be a lot more media activity in helping us get these vaccines to arms.
Okay.
There are a lot of competing interests in the media, but to be frank with you, if you have a third wave in 2 to 3 months' time, the media interest is going to, all the other interest is going to dissipate. We're going to go back to COVID. We're going to go back with interviews on what we should do, what we should not do.
Right.
I think this is a time when we have that lag period to basically up again and then get people to get vaccinated as quick as possible.
Let me rope in virologist Dr. Owusu. Now, that question was actually directed at you. You can take a bite at it, Dr. Owusu, and also maybe give us an idea when it comes to the shelf life of these vaccines. How much do we know? If we don't use them, within what periods do we start losing these vaccines if we don't use them?
Well, I need to confirm it, but I know it's about 6 months for the AstraZeneca vaccines, and most of them do something around 6 months. So
if that be the case, how come it's not been 6 months yet, but we're hearing some of them are going bad?
Of course, I think some of them came long. It went through the FDA.
We're hoping the connection can be worked out
before being on the field. So a lot of I mean, you need to confirm this with the FDA because they have the drug insert products for both Russian one and the AstraZeneca ones, and they can best tell the exactly. But I know is what I heard and what I've interacted is around six months for the.
Okay, so as we gear up to wrap up the conversation, and technology already trying to play games with us, but Dr. Owusu, now the World Health Organization, among others, have been telling us that if we don't adopt the right measures, if Africa as a continent, if we don't get the full complement of vaccines to roll out, to vaccinate more and more people and get more and more people getting their second jabs and all of that, all the gains we have made could be eroded. How do you take that as a virologist? What is the reality in there? Is it unnecessary fear being peddled? Is that the reality?
Well, I don't think this is fear, and this is the reality because of the nature of these viruses and how they tend to play out. You know, African Union recently had a meeting where they were discussing about getting some African countries to be able to manufacture our own vaccines. It looks like for now we have, I think, about 5 or 6 countries, in 2 in North America, Egypt, Tunisia, and then I think South Africa and some other 2 additional countries that just have the infrastructure for manufacturing vaccines. But then the question of even purchasing and buying these vaccines when they are manufactured in country in Africa is one of the biggest problems. Whether Africans will have the will or the political will to procure these vaccines. For so many years now, our vaccines are highly subsidized through UNICEF and through the Gavi Alliance. So most of the vaccines we get, from hepatitis to polio to measles to the mumps to the rubella, and a lot of them are things that are heavily subsidized, and some of them even come as free. So we feel used to getting some of these things just free, and most of the time, even if you have to pay, it's low. But vaccines is an investment. Companies invest money in vaccines, and companies manufacture these vaccines, and they have to get profit from it. So the question of resourcing countries in Africa to be able to manufacture our own vaccines and also procure our own vaccines is something that the African Union has been debating and looking at it a lot. Because now we have seen how nationalization can affect all of us as a people. Countries where vaccines are manufactured are trying to even pass laws that will restrict exportation of vaccines and COVID-related material from their country to other country. They want to ensure that their people are safe and fully protected before they look elsewhere. So we ask ourselves, should we continue to always depend on Western powers and other developed countries for some of these? It's not sustainable, and we may put our lives in danger and at risk. And COVID has taught us a lot of lessons, even with this particular vaccine. So yes, we can say we need it, and we have to make sure we vaccinate. But if you even have the money, where do you get it? You don't have the power. And for us also, we did not participate in a lot of the clinical trials, so we don't even have the bargaining power to even ask of a share of what we think we deserve.
Doc, should Ghana start contemplating, building capacity in this regard? Because the reality is that almost every century we have a virus like this that wipes out part of our global population. And the fact too is that viruses keep evolving, and we're going to have many more hurdles to climb in the next few years, decades, and all that. Should Ghana be building its capacity when it comes to the manufacturing of vaccines, I should say?
I think the president did indicate in one of his announcements, addresses, that he is going to set up a committee that will be headed by, I think, the Minister of Science and Technology, the former Minister of Science and Technology, to ensure that we have some vaccine manufacturing companies in Ghana. I hope that this will become one of our major priorities, and then do this and do it very well, even to the point of exporting this to elsewhere, not just for human vaccines, but even for animal vaccines. I mean, the veterinary, for instance, is one of the groups that, if they are empowered, they can manufacture vaccines even to be able to contain and manage the viruses that infect animals. We understand that this SARS is a zoonotic virus, and going forward, zoonotic viruses are going to gradually emerge and re-emerge and infect populations. So whilst you look at the human aspect, if you don't also resource the veterinary aspect for them to also produce large vaccines to even prevent, possibly contain these epidemics from moving from animal level to human level, then you wouldn't be doing much. So there is a need for us to look at this broad One Health approach, where we resource both the human aspect, the animal aspect, and ensure that we close all the gaps, so we'll be able to deal with some of these things when
okay.
As you said, it is very possible that the next virus or the next bacteria that may come up may be more virulent and more can pose more danger, because as we evolve and as we move on, and so we are closing in on some of these populations and moving into wildlife habitats, we are likely to endanger ourselves. And This is why we need to build good infrastructures, equip scientists, invest in research, invest in manufacturing sector to be able to manage some of this in going forward. So I do share with you, it should be a priority for government. And I think that if government takes upon itself to do this, I think it will be one of the biggest achievements that we're going to have as a country.
All right, so this question is for both of you, and then we wrap up on this conversation. And it's one that a lot of people are contemplating. And I'll start with you, Dr. O. The possibility of mixing vaccines. I remember posing this question some time back to Dr. Bediako, and he had his own responses. Now, it's becoming our reality. We may not get more, or at least as many AstraZeneca shots as we want. Can we use alternatives like Sputnik V? Can you take a first jab being AstraZeneca and a second jab being Sputnik V? What are the implications, the contraindications? What should we be looking at? A minute each to you, Dr. O. Let's start with you.
Yeah, so first of all, that is still a terrain that is still being investigated. We don't have enough information. As we speak now, even with respect to the technology between the different vaccines, what they are using may be different. The best thing is still to get a second shot of the same vaccine, and I believe that is still the priority, a drive to making sure that we source enough to make sure that when it is time to receive the second vaccine, people will get it.
But if we're pushed to the wall, the point is, if we are pushed to the wall, you're simply not going to get AstraZeneca again. Let's imagine that worst case scenario. What do you do? Do you start the vaccination all over again?
So that's what I meant by this is still under the science. If the two drugs are not compatible, if they do not give you what you expect, it does not necessarily mean that you will give it, okay? It may mean actually restarting vaccination with a new vaccine in the same people, knowing that may mean actually taking 2 doses of the Sputnik V and almost considering and that's why I said that there are still discussions, there are still investigations. If they are complementary to each other, then that may be a way to go. That is the advantage that the vaccines that are only one shot have over the ones that are double shot. But of course, the costs are a lot more, and then getting them are even much more difficult with to a patient. The good thing about AstraZeneca is actually the duration between the gap between the first and second dose. At the moment, we are basically plan at getting at 8 weeks interval. We know from enough literature that up to 12 weeks is actually acceptable and may actually in some literature showing, like in the ones coming from UK, and there is a paper out in the Lancet and that is part of the reason why UK is doing a 12-week second dose compared to 6 weeks in other places or 8 weeks. So we may still have a lag period of 4 weeks from our stipulated 8 weeks for a second dose, and I'm sure we are feverishly working towards making sure that we get that. But then if we're having vaccines expiring, that is not really the discussion, because if we're losing 500 vaccines, and most of those may be actually from vaccine management, these are cold chain, how do you manage and all that. So it is still not a decision at the moment because there's still a lot of
so that is clear. Let me come to Dr. Owusu now.
I'm sure Dr. Owusu will have even more ideas about that with respect to the virology.
Okay, so Dr. Owusu, I would like you to take a bite at this in 1 minute. What are the possibilities? Dr. Owu talks about the vaccines being complementary. What does that exactly mean?
Yeah, I think he shared exactly my thoughts on this, and I've really emphasized this on different platforms, that if you take the vaccines, each of them have different ways that they are manufactured. The Russian vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson, and the AstraZeneca are all vector-based vaccines, which are using different components of a virus we call adenoviruses to host the genetic makeup of a part of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. When you produce vaccines, I mean, the question of safety and efficacy is the reason why you are giving out the vaccine. So this is what has been tried through the preclinical phase, through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, based on which we are going for them. So if you, at any point in time, you feel that you want to mix vaccines, it's only appropriate that you take it through these phases. You have to go back and look at how this will play out in animal models and see whether if you mix it in animal models, are you likely to achieve that level of efficacy? Are you likely to achieve that high level of antibody? Is it going to be safe? And then you move it to phase 1, where you have it about maybe some few hundreds of people and see how this will play out in them. It will be quite dangerous to use a large population and begin giving mixed vaccines with the hope that it will work when you don't have evidence of data from the preclinical phase, from phase 1, from phase 2. And I don't think that this is the way to go. I mean, we are having difficulty with getting vaccines, but until we get enough data that will justify why we have to mix, I don't think that mixing is something we have to do. It could rather put us in more difficulties and can rather take out confidence that people have. Imagine in this population, when you mix vaccines and people begin to experience worse side effects, they will totally abandon the entire vaccines. And we put out our own people in danger. So I think that we may have to rely on the science of this and really look at good data that will come out before we can think of taking this approach.
Obviously, we need to tread cautiously, but we're very grateful for your time, gentlemen. Dr. Chris Owu, member of the COVID-19 team at the University of Ghana Medical Center, and Dr. Michael Owusu, a virologist with the KCCR. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
So on now to our next conversation, and it's talking about securing Ghana's porous borders. 9 Nigerian, citizens, I should say, were actually found in Adan, right here in Accra. Whether they are part of those jailbreakers is yet to be established, but we'll be joined in this conversation by Professor Kwesi Enning, Director, Faculty of Academic Affairs and Research at the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Center, to find out what the nitty-gritty is and what the way forward ought to be. That's our next conversation right here on the AM show. We'll be back after this break.